So today I'm going to be talking about some product principles that I've learned during my journey of being a product manager. I've been a product manager for about 4 years now, and my career actually initially started out in operations. And if I reflect on my time having worked in startups for almost a decade, there's a number of product principles that I've learned, and today I'm going to share 2 simple but really effective product principles. But before I go into that, I'm just going to properly introduce myself. So a little bit about me. I'm a senior product manager at Impala. That's an infrastructure tech company which is based in the travel industry. We are actually hiring for roles right now. We've got about 16 roles live, so if any of you are interested, definitely do have a look at that. In the last couple of years, I've also won a few awards, which I'm really delighted to have received, and also have worked for a number of startups as well, including Catapult, Hubble HQ, and Revolut. When I was invited to do this talk and it was mentioned that it would be a really good topic to do scrappy to scale, I initially thought that good content would potentially mean discussing how product teaming changes and how tooling changes, and as a company and product organization grows, how these evolve over time as well. Sorry, my slides are a little bit delayed. And how potentially using things like Jira is better than Shortcut, and when you need to use product board at some point because you have way too many user research and insights. But what was interesting is even at such a really big company such as Revolut, yes, we use Jira. We had even built our own tooling to detect dependencies as well. But yet we still use things like spreadsheets for user research and insights. And we still fundamentally used Google Docs and Word documents as well for things like trying to reteam ourselves whenever there was a new product goal that we needed to achieve too. But when I really took a step back and spoke to other product managers and assessed how product truly changes, I noticed that there's principles that actually never really change. And so instead of me discussing those things like tooling and hiring, which I can definitely address in the Q&A, I thought instead, let me discuss principles that never really change. And instead, I'm going to focus on a couple of things that I think as product managers, we sometimes really forget. As a product manager, we constantly worry about what we're delivering, and are we delivering user value? Are we hitting our metrics as well? But how often do we as product managers really ever step back and look at the drivers that affect our delivery the most? We are responsible for our teams. We're responsible for how they feel, whether they're motivated, whether they're aligned with the mission, and how many of you can honestly say that you step back on a daily basis and think, are the team and my developers aligned with the mission? Do they understand the mission? And are we driving innovation in our teams as well? These 2 things, when they do come up, are essentially fundamental at every and any growth stage that you are at in a company. Sorry, the slides on the thing aren't changing when my clicker changes. Thanks. Oh, one ahead again. Thank you. So as a product manager, apart from prioritizing the right things, the next best thing that will impact our work, and more importantly, our users, is productivity. How productive is our team? And what if I told you that there's one simple thing that you can do that will drive more efficiency and productivity, which only takes 5 minutes a day? You probably wouldn't necessarily believe me, but if you bear with me, and in 5 minutes, I'll introduce a concept that I actually introduced in my team roughly about a year ago, and is something that I wished I implemented years back. So this is a regular stand-up for us, and what we do, this in itself is called a wheel of names. You can't see it at the back, but essentially what it is we go on wheelofnames.com, We have our names listed on a random wheel. Someone gets to click it. Whoever the name lands upon gets to ask them a really random question. It's super simple, and I know it sounds like, why on earth would this work? But let me explain. The reason I initially implemented this was for non-selfish reasons. We typically change our product teams at Impala around every 2 to 3 months, and we have new team members join almost every week as well. So initially when I implemented this, it was to ensure that the teams could get to know each other without having to rely on organic interactions. And organic interactions, actually, they rarely ever happen in a remote environment as well. So this is one ritual that have made the teams more performant. What it does is it allows them to reach out together to each other. It allows them to get to know each other on a basis that you would never, ever get to know your colleagues. And it allows them to do it much more quicker as well. It's really easy for me to kind of stand here and profess about it, but what I did was I took a couple of screenshots from our Slack, and I think the developer comments really speak out for themselves. And this isn't just, for developers, it's anyone that's in your team. You should be bringing your data analysts in, product marketing people in as well. The one on the top left, I'm not sure if you can read that, but that really sums it up the best. She wrote in one of the sentences, "It really helps us reach out more to other team members, which I believe boosts productivity." Now, this really isn't about making your stand-ups less dull, although that is a byproduct of this little small ceremony. But what I've noticed is that it allows for an environment where people are psychologically safe, and team members get to know each other infinitely quicker than they ever would otherwise. They reach out to each other, there's more efficiency, and essentially more output and better products. And what more could you really ask for as well? So I've seen it happen constantly. After a stand-up, someone reaches out and says, "Hey dude, really cool story about your last travel experience in Santorini. I went there too last year. What'd you get up to? By the way, I'm working on this part of our docs. Can you help me out with that?" And this isn't an overnight success. I can't sit here and say, in 1 week, in 2 weeks, you'll see the change. But after a couple of months, you will start to see the change. You will start to see your team being much more efficient, much more productive as well. And this concept, it really works at any stage of a company that you're in, whether in the cross-functional team and in the early stages of a growing product, all the way through to kind of hypergrowth. And I can't emphasize enough that as product managers, it's really down to you to ensure that your team are getting along and productive and being productive as well. This is Peter. He worked with me at Impala. He has moved on to TrueLayer, and he mentioned that he's going to be implementing this. And so if there's anything that you take from this one principle, I hope that I've challenged you to potentially implement this really simple but effective principle. And maybe there's a better iteration or a different iteration that you think of. But the takeaway is, and I'll say it again, as a product manager, it really is down to you to ensure that your teams are aligned and working together in a really good way. So moving on, the other principle that I want to talk about is driving innovation. How do we do that? I think there's one part of product management that needs to be challenged. And there's a question that I'm just going to ask. Could you all put your hand up if, let's say, in the last couple of weeks, you've come across a problem area and you've gone through the discovery and you've solutionized it? Put your hand up if you have. Quite a considerable amount of people. This might sound a little bit out there. I personally think, and I know I put my hand up as well, but the way to drive more innovation is not necessarily to just stop this, but as a product manager, we shouldn't be doing this. I can't stress enough that it's the team's priority to do this, not just you as a product manager. It's really uncomfortable, though, right, to hear that. Like, removing the fact that it shouldn't be the product manager's job to solutionize almost feels like there's no existence for our role anymore. But let me assure you, there's tons of product manager roles going. But what I mean is, it shouldn't be you driving the solution and then getting input from your developers and from your team. It should be the other way around. And this goes in tandem with the outcome of the previous principle, which is that once your team and developers are productive and if they feel empowered to drive solutions, this literally makes for a winning team and a productive team as well. So how do we get there? Essentially, there's a couple of things of almost a checklist that you can be asking yourselves and to know whether you're on the right track with this. So one, are your teams aligned with the business goals? The way to stress test this is to think about if today, you guys weren't here, or on Monday when you go back to work, if you were to ask people in your team, what is the North Star, what are the key KPIs? If they can't answer this without having to pause or say, I need to go and check the metric tooling that we have that shows me that, then they're not aligned, basically. They don't know what's going on. And there's really no easy solution to this. You can have a daily Slack bot, an email reminder. I've done bi-weekly alignment meetings with the team as well. But unfortunately, what this requires is a very un-British approach, which is to literally say it over again and again and again and again until your team truly understands. And that's ongoing because the goals sometimes they change. But if you say it 2 weeks ago on a Monday, the likelihood that your team are going to remember it 2 weeks after is quite low. So it's really an annoying thing to have to do as a product manager, but you absolutely need to make sure that your team knows what's going on and whether they're aligned with the goals. Secondly, and this will change over time as your team and company grows, but are they aligned and do they understand the strategy? This might be, in the early stage, just the company strategy and potentially the strategy against competitors as well. But over time, that's going to become the department strategy, the product and marketing strategy as well. And there'll be multiple layers of this. But this is, again, another case where your team literally needs to know exactly who the customer segments are, what's the go-to market, and importantly, the why. It all starts with the why. That's why we're always told as product managers the first book that we should read is Simon Sinek, Why? Go watch his podcast or his TED Talk even. And as an additional part to this, does your team truly know your users and their behaviors as well? How many of you can honestly put your hands up and say that everyone in your team knows pretty much the fundamentals of your users, how they behave, what kind of usage they have for your product? No hands? I can't even honestly say that as well. So I think that this is something, again, as product managers, we need to be driving for. And lastly, really, have you stepped back and allowed your team to solutionize? If you don't give them the opportunity, then how are they going to do that? It's very easy to say, okay, and I've been guilty of this as well. You run an ideation session, you share the problem, you let everyone do some brainstorming on a Miro board, and then at the end you say, okay, great, thanks everyone for the ideas. I'm going to take these away, and I'll come up and write some specs for it. Why are we doing this? Why aren't we letting people in our teams take ownership of this and actually have them come up with how we implement it? Like I said, it's not you that should be driving the solution and getting their input, but the other way around. And this applies at any stage. I've tried where possible to do this, at a small startup where it was just 7 people in that startup, all the way through to Revolut, where I've had 10 engineers that I have to people manage as well. But these fundamentals stay the same, right? So 1 is, are your team aligned? And 2 is, are you allowing them the space to drive solutions and innovate? I hope that you're able to take something away from that, and I happily welcome any questions.
Thank you, Jasmine. Sometimes engineers just want to write code or test. Is this a problem? I can feel it.
I don't think it is too much of a problem, but I mean, that assumes that someone's role is very one-dimensional, and I think when you're working in a startup, even in a big enterprise company, that is never really true. All roles are multi-dimensional, and I think it's about, whether you're in your structures. I actually think that at Revolut, when I had to manage 10 engineers, it was the worst thing, not because it was extremely time-consuming, but I, as a product manager, shouldn't be the person to decide an engineer's future. It should be an engineering lead. But you should be talking with their engineering lead as to say, okay, why is this? How can we get them to understand that actually it's not just their role to code, it should be that they're involved with everything else as well. So I do think it's a problem, and I do think it's something that you need to address. There's nothing stopping you from having a quick one-to-one with that developer as well.
Are there any occasion where you're like, okay, I just understand that you're not going to get involved in this, you just want to code and test, and you're going to let them do it, or...
I would never personally, but I know that I appreciate that's very easier said than done. I mean, you know, if someone was to say, and if you had someone that was in your team but didn't join the team meetings, that's actually probably grounds for, you know, not necessarily a dismissal, but at least a performance conversation there. That wouldn't apply elsewhere, and I know that we live in a engineering world right now that says that there's way too many roles and not enough engineers, and so they feel like they might have a bit of bargaining power, but essentially, why would you let that happen if other engineers are going to potentially copy that and emulate that as well?
Yeah, I agree with you. Another question, how do you create an environment of getting to a solution together?
Yeah, I think it's something that is, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say there's a quick, easy fix to it. I think it takes a multiple set of components to get there. But that's why I kind of mentioned, you know, is the team aligned? When they understand the mission, when they truly understand the business goals, how things operate, and they don't need to understand how absolutely everything operates, they're in a position to be able to think, okay, maybe I can come up with a solution with this. But it's not going to happen by itself. You can't expect, especially in a remote environment, you can't expect that a developer is going to come to you and say, hey, I just came up with a solution for this. So sometimes it is forcing it. It's saying, I'm putting in an ideation session next week. We're all going to attend. I'm going to, you know, nominate a couple of you to act the owner on some of these, and that means that you need to do a little bit of homework before you come in. So it's annoying because it's quite unnatural to do that. You don't usually think that you should do that with developers especially, but it's about being very proactive and almost deliberate about some of those meetings that you're putting in as well.
Do you still participate to those sessions, or you just let them run the meeting, basically?
So I've done a combination where, you know, I lead and then kind of nominate people to run parts of the session, and then I close it out at the end. I think it's very rare that a developer is ever going to lead the entire session, unless if it's, hey, we're building a payment solution. They know way more about it than I ever would, and then they feel like they can do it, and that's usually when someone has done or solved that problem before. But it's a mix of the two. I think it's much more, you as a product manager should be presenting the problem space, presenting the user insights, the metrics, and then allow the developer to kind of share what maybe background they've had in that particular problem space, and then lead on the area. And it's very easy for us to come up with ideas, that's not a problem. But the part that you allow them to take the ownership part of is after the ideation session. So that means, okay, so-and-so came up with these two ideas. You literally want to be saying to them in that meeting, okay, can you guys take this away and come back to me and the team with a literal, you know, step-to-step solution of how you think that we should implement this, and share it back with everyone in stand-up. And then that way, they can't really get around it. They can't say no. And they're going to be a little bit embarrassed when you call upon them in a stand-up. So that's how I've kind of done it before.
Cool, thank you very much. Following up on the first question, what if you are an introvert and are completely uncomfortable public speaking? How do you facilitate for those personalities?
So I guess that question could be taken in two ways. I don't know if you mean if the product manager is an introvert or the developer is an introvert. The developer's an introvert. I mean, that happens, that's common. But I think that's where, you know, it was mentioned in previous sessions where not everything has to be a meeting where everyone speaks up and talks. Why couldn't it be a notion that's written down that is supported by maybe a quick video where they don't even show their face of what it is that they're talking about? I think we live in a world, or at least I do at Impala, where everything mostly is async and remote. And so not everything is a meeting. And that means that they can go away, come up with a solution, share it with the team, and it doesn't have to be verbal. They don't have to share it in that way. And I think as as their team members. You need to be responsive to that. I would way prefer that than for them not to share anything. And so I think it's about step improvements rather than forcing them and say, hey, drawing upon them in a stand-up and asking, hey, can you share this with me now? Especially if they are introverted, you have to be very mindful of their personality traits.
So it's a process, basically, with them. Yeah.
And eventually, over time, you might start to see them come out a bit more and express that a bit more.
Yeah. What do you recommend to do if my engineers are not aligned with the business goals?
Okay, that's an interesting one. I think that could be taken in two ways. Are they not aligned because they don't understand it, or are they not aligned because they disagree with it? And the two are very, very, very different. If it's the former, then that's on you to get everyone aligned and potentially put in that meeting and share and understand. Host a Q&A session, every 2 weeks. I kind of do that, especially with big projects that have come in. I extend a stand-up and say, okay, this is a Q&A where anyone can ask a question about anything to do with the company. And sometimes I don't even have the answer, so I have to go back and go and get that, but I'm responsible for sharing that with them. Now, if it's the latter, where your developers are kind of saying, I disagree with this, that's actually a really good problem to have. Like, if your developers are that opinionated, that means that they are aligned. They understand everything that's going on, but they just disagree with it. And so then that's a very different case in hand, which is about talking to them and understanding. And actually, maybe you are in a position where you want to be receptive to that feedback and go back and realign on the goals or the strategy, because it's not top down. You as a product manager shouldn't be saying, okay, the head of product told me this, these are our goals, and therefore I'm telling you, so you know. It's a process that should be involved with everyone. And so if you are having, to direct information again and again and again, and it's just passing on information and not getting them involved in the process of it, then I think that's where the solution should lie.
And do you use the same tools with your engineers to share the objectives and goals that you use with your stakeholders? Oh
yeah, absolutely. There's no reason, if I'm trying to, why should I spend double the time reporting on 2 different tools? That doesn't make sense. And secondly, I shouldn't be in a position where I assume that one set of stakeholders can't understand or be in a position where they need to see it differently. I work in a company, much like the guy before was saying, in Netflix, everything is transparent. So, I will happily share the run rate that we have left or whatever else it might be. But there's no reason why I should be calling upon that from a different tool than what I'm sharing with the CEO and other C-levels. It should absolutely all be the same, because then everyone across the company knows where they need to go to get that information as well. You don't have to say, well, the sales team have to go here to get the same piece of information that the marketing team have to go to a different place to get to.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much. Another question. Do you bring in other stakeholders together with the developers, like legal, commercial, sales?
Yeah, sometimes, but that's more on a consultative basis rather than, they wouldn't be attending the general daily stand-ups. And it's ad hoc and as and when needed. It doesn't even have to be a stand-up. Sometimes if it's a small piece of information, I go out and ask legal or ask marketing, and then I just present that back in a stand-up. I don't need to, not necessarily waste their time, but I don't need to bring them into a stand-up. Depending on how big the matter is, I think it's just use your judgment there, really.
Okay. Do you have Scrum Master? Where I work, this will be their job, I guess, taking care of the team, facilitating the work that they're doing.
Yeah, I at the current company that I'm at, there isn't a Scrum Master. I'm always of the opinion that essentially the product manager is responsible for your product. And so I appreciate that it's very easy to kind of sit there and say, okay, well, that's the Scrum Master's job. But ultimately, if the success of the product is down to you, then why would you leave some of that responsibility elsewhere? Like, if it's equally, it's up to me as a product manager to say, okay, the developers aren't happy, they're disgruntled. It's not for me to just vocalize it and do nothing. It's for me to vocalize it, come up with a particular solution, share it with their engineering manager, who is their people lead, and then potentially they might do something about it. So it's not about stepping on each other's toes. But I absolutely believe that that's actually more of a product manager's role and responsibility. If you're not in a position where you can do that, then, if it's a collab, then you need to be sharing it with the Scrum Master and solutionizing with them, rather than just saying, hey, here's some problems, please can you deal with it?
One question from Callum. Do you bring along other PMs from different teams? How do you get alignment across the product function?
So I guess the question there is, do I bring in other PMs in stand-ups? Not usually. I might, if it's like an alignment meeting at the beginning of the quarter where I'm saying, okay, this is what we're doing, here's what the other teams are doing, and this is why. But again, as a product manager, we're having not consistent, but consistent and weekly stand-ups as product managers anyway. So I make it my responsibility, as I'm sure we all do here, to understand what it is that they're doing and why as well. And if I don't think that's the right thing, then I should be challenged it. If my developers don't think it's the right thing, I also tell them they can go and challenge it directly. It doesn't necessarily need to be like a loop through me every time. But no, I don't always bring them in because it's the person that's responsible for their area doesn't have to come in and say, this is what I'm doing for my area. I should be able to share that with my team as well.
One last question. How do you celebrate success with your team?
It's a good question. Recently, it's just been a lot of ad hoc lunches. So I'll ask the people team basically if we can have a budget. I basically just ask, hey, can someone find time where we can all have lunch together? We use an app called GatherTown. It's basically like a virtual space where you can go and meet in like it's tried to emulate the fact that if you were in an office, if you were walking around, you would bump into people. So you can walk into like the games area and play games with people. So that's typically what we do because we are fully remote. Other times I do try and, potentially get us to do different things. I don't know if any of you know Wheel of Fortunes, the TV show. Kind of did our own version of that. But you can be creative with it, and I think it's about celebrating little successes, not just a success at the end or a success at Christmas time because it's Christmas time.
Yeah, we like celebrating often.
Yeah.
Okay, is there any other question from the audience? No? Yasmin, thank you very much.
Thank you.